She didn't realize everyone was watching her until the silence in the cafeteria suddenly felt heavy. She stood there, clutching her food tray with both hands, trying to pretend she wasn't scanning the room for a place to sit. But the truth was clear. Every table was full, every group deep in their conversations, and every pair of eyes seemed to flick toward her with a mixture of disinterest and judgment. She wasn't used to moments like this, but today the loneliness hit differently, like a knot tightening in her throat. She shifted her weight, took a small breath, and told herself she would be fine, but even she didn't fully believe it. She had transferred only a week ago, still learning the rhythm of the place, still unsure where she fit. The cafeteria was always the hardest part. Long tables, loud laughter, inside jokes she wasn't a part of. She knew she looked out of place, standing alone, and she hated that her hands trembled just slightly, something she tried to hide by gripping the tray a little too tightly. If she could just find a quiet corner, she thought, maybe nobody would notice her. But the room felt too bright, too loud, too full of people who already belonged somewhere. She considered leaving entirely, maybe taking her food outside despite the cold. The idea carried a certain relief. No eyes, no whispers, no awkward lingering. But running would only make her feel smaller. She'd promised herself she would try today, really try. She shifted again, scanning the room for anything, anyone, that might offer a silent welcome. Nothing. Across the room, however, someone noticed her hesitation in a way that felt different from the others. He had been sitting with a group, half listening to the ongoing conversation, when his attention drifted toward the lone figure standing near the entrance. Something about her posture, the subtle stiffness in her shoulders, struck him. He recognized that quiet discomfort. He'd felt it more times than he liked to admit. Without saying anything, he turned his head fully and watched her for a moment longer. He felt a pull inside him, something warm and instinctive. Maybe it was empathy, maybe it was memory, maybe it was the simple desire to make sure no one felt the way he once did. He looked around his own table, crowded, filled with backpacks and half-finished lunch trays. Not an inch of space to offer. But the idea of just watching her struggle didn't sit right with him. She took one tentative step forward, ready to search again, when she heard a sudden scrape from across the room. Chairs shifting, something being moved. She looked up instinctively, and saw him. A tall boy in a gray hoodie, sleeves rolled up, standing at a messy table that clearly wasn't his. He pulled napkins from a dispenser, wiped crumbs off the surface, moved empty cups aside, and even stacked trays that weren't his. He wasn't looking at her, but his actions were too purposeful to be random. She blinked, confused. Was he actually cleaning that table, for her? He kept working until the tabletop was spotless, the chairs neatly aligned, the leftovers carried to the bin. Then, only then, did he lift his head and meet her eyes. No smile, no dramatic gesture, just a simple nod. A quiet message, "This is for you. You're welcome here." Her breath caught. It was the smallest gesture, but in that moment, it felt like the world had shifted slightly. Someone had noticed her. Someone had cared enough to act. She hesitated at first, unsure if she should accept it. But when she finally took a step toward the table, something in her chest softened. Maybe today wouldn't be as hard as she thought. Maybe people weren't all the same. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she felt. As she approached the table he had cleared, she tried to steady her breath, still unsure how to process what had just happened. The cafeteria buzzed around her, but the noise now felt muffled, distant, as though the world had narrowed to the small clean table waiting for her. She placed her tray down gently, almost reverently, as if it were a fragile gift she didn't want to disturb. Her fingers lingered on the edge of the table for a moment, grateful yet hesitant, overwhelmed by a stranger's kindness. He didn't rush over or wave at her. Instead, he returned to his original spot, grabbed his own tray, and walked toward her with a quiet confidence. Not arrogant, not assuming, just respectful. The kind of confidence that didn't demand anything in return. As he reached the table, he paused, making sure she was comfortable. She met his eyes and gave a small, appreciative nod, and only then did he sit across from her, leaving enough space to show she had control of the moment. She wasn't sure how to start the conversation. How do you thank someone for something so simple yet so meaningful? But he spoke first, breaking the silence with a gentle, "Is it okay if I sit here?" He asked it softly, giving her the chance to say no without judgment. She shook her head lightly, offering a shy smile. Yes. Thank you. He shrugged, as if brushing off the gesture, though she could tell he meant it deeply. No one should have to eat standing up. But she knew it wasn't just about standing. It was about being seen, being included, being given a chance to breathe in a space that felt overwhelming. She lowered her gaze for a moment, fiddling with her fork, the words, "thank you," forming again in her mind but refusing to settle. Slowly, they began to talk. Not about anything heavy or personal at first, just small things, the little details that reveal more than people realize. She learned he loved drawing, sketching on notebooks during boring lectures. He learned she liked reading thrillers and secretly wrote short stories she never showed anyone. Their conversation wasn't loud or animated, it was slow, warm, and full of gentle pauses that somehow didn't feel awkward. He noticed the way she relaxed over time, her shoulders loosening, her voice softening, her eyes coming alive with curiosity. She noticed the way he listened, not just hearing, but truly listening, giving her space to speak without rushing her. She couldn't remember the last time someone had paid attention to her with such quiet sincerity. At one point, he reached for his drink and accidentally knocked over a packet of sugar, which slid to her side of the table. They both bent to pick it up, their fingers brushing for just a second. She felt a spark of warmth at the contact, a brief, unexpected moment that made her heart skip. He looked at her, startled by the same feeling, and they both laughed softly, the tension melting away like it had never existed. From across the room, a few people watched. Some with curiosity, some with surprise, some with the quiet admiration that comes when someone witnesses kindness. But they didn't notice. They were too caught up in the rare comfort of being understood. As lunch went on, she realized something she hadn't allowed herself to believe. This moment, this simple act of inclusion, might be the beginning of something important. Not necessarily a romance, not necessarily a friendship, but something human, something meaningful. A connection formed not by grand gestures, but by a chair pulled out and a table cleared. When the bell rang and students began packing up, neither wanted to be the first to stand. It wasn't because they didn't want to leave, it was because the moment had become something they didn't want to end. As the cafeteria emptied, the echo of shuffling footsteps faded until only the two of them remained at their table. She stared at her now empty tray, replaying the moment he first stood up from his own group to clear a space for her. It was so unusual, so out of place in a world where most people avoided extra effort unless they benefited somehow. She wondered what had made him act, what instinct, what memory, what hidden kindness had moved him so effortlessly. She wanted to ask, but the question felt too heavy for the warm quiet surrounding them. He noticed her silence and leaned back slightly, folding his arms loosely, giving her room to think. Not the kind of room that creates distance, but the kind that gently invites honesty. "You looked like you needed a break from the crowd," he finally said. "I know what that feels like." His voice was steady, but there was something beneath it, something raw, something personal left unspoken. She sensed it immediately. Without meaning to, she asked, "Did it happen to you too?" The question slipped out like a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at the table, tracing a faint scratch on the surface with his finger. After a moment, he nodded. "More times than I like to remember. I promised myself that if I ever saw someone feeling like that, I wouldn't just look away." The honesty in his tone warmed her more than the words themselves. The cafeteria felt colder now that the heaters had switched off, but sitting across from him, she felt something steady and comforting, like a fragile courage growing inside her. She realized she hadn't felt this calm with anyone in a long time. She wanted to tell him how much the gesture meant to her, not just the table, but the effort, the awareness, the humanity. But gratitude often tangled her words, making them clumsy. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "People don't usually notice," she said finally. "And even when they do, they don't help." He tilted his head, studying her expression. "Maybe they don't know how," he replied gently. "Or maybe they're afraid of doing something that stands out." It was an interesting thought, fear disguised as indifference. She wondered how many people had wanted to help her in the past but held back. And she wondered how many times she had done the same. She looked at him then, really looked at him. He seemed ordinary at first glance, quiet, unassuming, but the kind of ordinary that feels rare once you understand it. The kind that doesn't demand attention, but deserves it anyway. The kind that makes a place feel less overwhelming. Their conversation drifted again, softer now, weaving in and out of personal stories and shared observations. She spoke about her first week, the constant uncertainty, the discomfort of walking halls where everyone already had a place. He told her about the art club he joined last year because it was the only room where he didn't feel invisible. They found themselves smiling more freely, their voices easing into a rhythm like they'd known each other longer than an hour. Eventually, he stood up, lifting his tray. "I should get to class," he said, though his tone carried a hint of reluctance. She nodded, gathering her own things. When they stepped away from the table, neither of them said goodbye immediately. Instead, they paused, facing each other with a quiet understanding that something meaningful had shifted between them. As he walked toward the exit, he turned back once. "Hey, if you ever need a place to sit again, you don't have to wait." She felt her cheeks warm, and she nodded, unable to hide the small smile forming. "Thank you," she whispered, this time clear, steady, full. When she finally left the cafeteria, the loneliness that had clung to her at the beginning of lunch was gone. In its place was something softer, lighter, almost hopeful. One simple gesture, a table cleared, a seat offered, had changed the way her entire day felt. And though neither of them knew it yet, it was only the beginning.